you have a channel, you don't have channels, or if you do have channels, they're closed, right? And if your permeability is high, that means you've got open channels. Okay. So, what would a leak channel look like? It might be a straight line. Okay, it wouldn't be at the bottom. Okay, it'd be somewhere in the middle or low in the middle. But these channels here are opening and closing, right? You can see that. So, which is which? We'll just pick one to start with. So, which channel is represented by the brown line? So, reason through this with someone close to you, and it may require that you figure out more than just one in order to put it in proper order. And VG stands for voltage gated. You're all voltage gated, though.
So purple is right?
Which calcium?
Which one? I'm thinking the L-type.
That's right.
Why? So because it's
But that one
highly
seems
permeable.
Is what?
It's highly
But
permeable.
what about the L-type, or what about the T-type?
The T, oh, they're looking the same.
It's like the brown and the purple.
Yeah.
But which one comes first?
So the brown would be T-type.
I thought we were talking about purple first.
Oh yeah, but purple would be L-type, so that would come second. That makes a lot of sense. Because I was between at first, this was before, but between HCN and then the voltage gated sodium channels, just because.
That's what I was actually, that's why I was thinking it was at the
Yeah.
sodium one.
Just because of the straight line and how he was like, leak channels are a straight line. But I don't, is he talking about this? Like, oh, HCN is that one?
HCN is activated by hyperpolarity.
Yeah.
So that's the voltage.
I think HCN is the green line. I don't know.
You think what?
It's the green line.
Oh, let me answer this real quick.
Which one do you think it is though? I think it's T.
Yeah.
I think HCN is green line.
HCN.
Because we think that the action potential is when the purple line is peaking, because that's the L-type, and that's when it's like the most depolarized, so the HCN channels will be completely closed. But then right after it kind of gets hyperpolarized, they open up, like the green opens up right after the action potential finishes.
Sorry,
That's
it
good.
takes me like
How's everybody doing?
Okay.
Does everybody know which line is brown?
Then what's
Anybody have a problem with that?
is the red one K?
Yes, I believe so.
Or not K?
97. Okay.
Potassium.
Anybody need more time? Okay. Where's my mouse? Okay. Round line. What is somebody who picked? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Somebody. You have a strong opinion about this, anyone? Yeah, that's strong opinions. Anybody's neighbor? Yeah.
Why is the brown line? Or it's not?
Tell me about the brown line. What do you think about it?
Okay, I think it's the T-type because it lasts for just a little bit, and
You mean it's transient?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think it's because like the green line opens first. I think that's the NA, and then ones that like opens for a little bit, it will be the L-type. I mean the T-type for just a little bit.
Well, how do you interpret the purple line?
The purple would be the long lasting.
Well, the L-type, yeah. Red?
Okay.
Okay. That makes sense to me too. It would probably be, you're right. It'd be harder if it were, not just one action potential and maybe you could see that the first one to have change is not necessarily the first, you know, because we can mix it up a little bit. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
Is the red not sodium?
Is the red not sodium? There is no sodium. I mean, sodium is an option here,
Right.
but we don't have voltage-gated sodium channels here.
What is the first one?
You believe me?
Which one's the green one?
Oh, let me show you. All right, so the first one, the first thing that happens is the HCN channel opens up. This is a sodium channel,
Right.
but of the options, we have HCN channels. That's our sodium channel here. Yeah.
That would be sodium opening and coming in.
In green, yes. Yeah.
Why not red? Because doesn't,
The
that gets higher first.
well, the red change precedes the green. Right? Red rises before green does.
Right, so why is that not HCN?
Why is the red not HCN?
Yeah.
The change in red, the way I look at it, explains the behavior of the calcium channel, because the calcium channel is, I guess it matters where you start, doesn't it? Let me draw on here and see if I can illustrate the way I'm thinking about it, and then we'll take a quick look at the way you're thinking of it and see if it's consistent. That might be. So let me see. So here I get HCN. Okay. T.
But that's not
Yeah.
times zero.
You're right. It's not times 0. Okay. All right. You're saying, and you could be right here. The problem here is that we don't know which part of the cycle we're starting with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we use times 0 and red, let's see if it works out that way. Right is HCN, is that what you said? Is that the one you liked? T-type. Brown would be L. I don't like that, because you have a big change in permeability to calcium. And that would be K. Yeah, apart from the fact that the L is way too small of a change, you're not far off. I will never put this as a test question. Okay. Okay. But can you to be able to walk yourself through how permeability changes lead to what we're talking about? Yeah. Okay. But principally, yeah, I mean, I can ask you a question about how the effects of the HCN channel, which channel is affected by the opening of the HCN channel. Okay, and that would be the T-type channel. Yeah. Nobody's ever suggested that before. That's good thinking. It's very easy to fall in the trap of thinking that left is the beginning and right is the end of our cycle, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. Okay. Now, I often have trouble with students confounding these two types of cells, okay? So promise me that you know the difference between a conduction cell and a contractile cell. Say, I promise, right, Johnson? Okay, okay. Which is which? Contractile cells are on the right. Okay. Which one has a pacemaker potential? Conduction cells on the left. Okay. So if I say, at what point does the HCN channel open up, and I give you a bunch of answers that correspond to the contractile cell, you will know not to answer those ones, right? And that reduces exception like I'm not out to tricky. Okay, so I want to put a bunch of channels here on the top, just to remind you that again, just as in our conduction channels, we got a mess of stuff going on here, right? We have leak channels for potassium that give us a resting membrane potential. Okay, so while we're here at rest, there's no net ion flux really happening. Okay, we've got sodium potassium pumps going. We've got our potassium leak channels. Okay, so the very first thing that happens in the cycle of contractile cell activity is that we get a very typical type of action potential response that we'd see in a neuron or a skeletal muscle cell. And that is we have the opening of voltage-gated sodium channels. Okay? We haven't seen these yet. They weren't in the other type of cell. But we get a huge influx of sodium. Sodium goes way up into the positives. I don't know why I lost my numbers there, but and again, they're all over the cell. First question is, if it's a voltage-gated sodium channel, what causes it to go from closed to open?
It reaches threshold.
Hmm?
It reaches threshold.
It's going to reach a threshold, which is about -55, and then open. Okay. Where does that come from? Where does that little bump come from that pushes it up to threshold? Yeah, the nodal cells. Okay. So we could have a nodal cell right next door, right? You could put a nodal cell over here, right? Or a nodal cell might be many, many cell lengths away, but connected through other cardiocytes, contractile cells. Okay. Okay. How are these cells interconnected? Yeah, they're gap junctions. Okay, gap junctions are a way of electrically coupling these cells so that when you have two cells next door, right, their membranes are interconnected by very effective electrical junctions. Okay, so the electrical activity, that is depolarizations in one cell, are going to pass directly from one cell to the next. Okay, so even though you don't see it here in this little image, right, there's a little stimulus that comes in here at the bottom that's coming from an action potential that's moving from another cell to this cell. Okay, and indirectly, this has come from a nodal cell. Okay, maybe it's crossed hundreds of cells already, and it's coming from a contractile cell. Okay, but ultimately, it goes back to the SA node cell that started this action. Okay, so we've got the opening up of voltage-gated sodium channels, and the voltage gated tells you that it's a voltage change that stimulates the opening, right? So the voltage change comes from an action potential that's moving across our artery. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. The next thing that happens is this voltage-gated channel closes. Okay. And for a very brief period of time, there's no other channel open. That sodium channel has destabilized in the very strongly positive territory, and it goes back into its closed state. As an inactive in a closed state, but it becomes inactive. Okay. So what happens? We have this period of time where there's a little dip, and we call this the brief repolarization. So why is the cell membrane potential moving towards zero? It was up in the positive territory, now it's moving towards zero. Why? We haven't opened up a potassium channel, right? We don't have a voltage-gated potassium channel here that repolarizes us. What's happening? Yeah.
Is it because some sodium will always be moving out of the cell? Or because like so.
No, so sodium has moved into the cell, and that has brought us up into the positive territory. Okay, but now we're moving back towards zero and ultimately the direction of negative. Yeah.
Is it because your calcium channels open? A lot of calcium channels open?
No, it's not just yet. We're gonna get to that in a second. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's partly the sodium potassium pump. Okay, so when the sodium comes in, there's a lot of intracellular sodium that those pumps can grab a hold of, and they start working overtime pumping out sodium. So you're right about that. That it's partly due to the sodium leaving the cell. Okay. What else do we have all over the surface of the cell? Leak channels, right? So even if nothing else happens, even if we somehow stop the sodium potassium pump, this membrane potential would slowly drift back down to -90, right? Because if the membrane potential is determined by those open potassium channels, it's going to go down until it gets to its equilibrium. Okay. So just shutting off all channels causes everything to come back towards resting. Okay. And that's what you see here with the brief pump repolarization. So yeah, you can think of it as sodium potassium pump is working a little bit to cause the normal polarized state of the cell. Okay. And it's also just potassium moving through channels to get back towards -90. But before that could happen, we have the next phase. Okay, so we have a little brief period of pause here. And the next phase is caused by both calcium and potassium. Okay? So we've got an L-type channel, which is very permeable. Lots of potassium, lots of calcium can move through here. Okay. And what's going to happen if only potassium is allowed to go through the cell membrane? What's going to happen to that membrane potential? Is it going to go more positive or more negative?
More negative.
Positive calcium is on the outside and it's going in. So the inside is going to become we've got positive calcium on the outside, and the inside is having positive ions added to it. So the membrane potential is becoming more positive. Okay. So calcium's work here is to push the membrane potential more positive. Okay. So calcium has a very high, very positive equilibrium potential. Okay. Which makes sense because it's got lots of extracellular positive ions, right? And very few on the inside of the cell, just like sodium. Okay. All right, so we open this channel as a result of voltage change. We also open a potassium channel. Okay. Potassium channels, a lot of potassium through. You can see my arrow, so I don't need to ask you the direction that potassium is going. Potassium is trying to make that cell membrane more negative on the inside, right? So potassium's effect is to push the potential down into negative. Okay. So calcium makes the membrane potential more positive when it goes through, and potassium makes the membrane potential more negative when it goes through in the opposite direction. Okay. So if they're both open at the same time, we get this sort of brief period of time where we're not moving strongly up or down. Okay, we're moving down a little bit more negative. Right. So potassium's kind of weighing out a little bit, but we've got both working in opposite directions. Okay, so what this does is it extends the period of time, right, where we've got calcium flowing into the cell. Okay, it extends this. We have this period of time where calcium channels are maintained in the open state, and calcium continues to flow into our cells. Okay. So what happens when we have calcium in cardiac cells? Contraction, right? So calcium inside of our cells means contraction, right? That's a big deal. So this plateau corresponds to the stimulation of the muscles, of the heart muscle cell. So we want calcium in our cells, and we don't want just a brief little pulse of calcium. We want this extended period of calcium release into the cell. Okay. All right. So what happens is eventually that continues to slope down, and the calcium channel just shuts off. Okay. So if the calcium shuts off, who's still open?
Potassium.
Potassium. Okay. And so potassium now, unopposed, will continue to move out of the cell, making the cell more and more negative as the positives accumulate outside. Right? And we get back down to -90. Okay. So we have three types of channels here that are important. Right? We've got our voltage-gated sodium channel that opens up. It turns off and we begin to repolarize slowly. And then we open up the calcium and potassium channels, and they're moving in opposite directions and maintaining this plateau. Okay? The plateau is always kind of sloping downward, but we call it plateau anyway. Right? And then we get finally that L-type channel closes off. Okay? So why do we have all these calcium channels? Why on earth am I torturing with calcium channels? Because not all channels are the same. Right? There are dozens of potassium channels, for example. Not all calcium channels are the same either. And because they're not, they can be selective targets for pharmaceuticals. Okay? So there's lots of different things that we might call calcium channel blockers. Verapamil is one very common type of pharmaceutical that's considered a calcium channel blocker. What would happen if this blocked all calcium channels? We need that T type of channel to help get us up to threshold, right? In the pacemaker cells. So we might diminish that a little bit. We don't want to do that. But if we want to selectively affect the L type channel, we have a pharmaceutical that can do that. And what would be the effect? Let's say we're not blocking it entirely because we don't want to die, but we want to change the behavior of this action potential a little bit. What would happen if we blocked or slowed down calcium movement? What would that action potential look like? Which depolarization phase look different? No, that's a sodium channel. What about that root free polarization? No. What about your plateau? Yeah. So it would be shorter, right? It might look more like head down more precipitously, right? That wasn't very good. Let's say it's looking like that. Okay. What's the effect on the cell? Less calcium inside your muscle cell means what? Shorter contraction or less strong contraction. So this is calcium channel blockers are sometimes used in people who have high blood pressure because you're going to pump less blood out of your heart. Okay, makes sense. Okay, so learning these channels is important because we have pharmaceutical interventions that affect some channels but not all channels, right? So knowing which channels they affect and where they are in the body helps you understand the behavior. Okay. Any questions so far? All right, let's do one more fun one. Because you like these, right? I can tell.
What is, I think 2 is calcium. Because 2 is the longest. You could be wrong.
Is it accurate?
This is
Okay.
staying. This is because for like
I see.
for like a longer time because you said it's open for a longer time. Because like, because my thought is that, well, my
If you can answer this in the next minute.
but
Sure.
I think it's F because here's why.
There's only 3 channels.
One for N because N is super permeable.
3 permeable.
It's super membrane is super permeable for a really brief period of time because it doesn't straight shoot open. And like,
This is a little bit weird, actually.
but three could also be calcium because you would trigger on both to start and 3 could be calcium because it's kind of slowly doing its thing. However, one reason I was thinking is because calcium closes before potassium.
Couldn't potassium be one?
Potassium could be one too.
Just because it's higher
Yeah.
permeability, because it wins over calcium.
Mhm.
So calcium is 2. Potassium would win over calcium.
Right.
All right, take another 20 seconds.
What do you think calcium
Plug
is
your
too?
answer, please.
Yeah.
Do you not?
No, I agree with that. And then the one that's sort of like the only thing that lingers open after. Okay, so 3 is open between the end of 2 and like the start of 1.
Yeah.
So that would have to be taking part in repolarization.
Which
So
would be
2 would
right.
have to
Anybody
be
need more time?
That's what I thought too.
Yeah.
So you put
Okay.
the last one.
Yeah.
That's
So I think one way to
It
approach
was like
this
sodium is open for so little.
is by how quickly something opens and closes. Which one of these is open very briefly?
One.
One. And the other 2 are open for longer periods of time. What does that tell you about what number 1 might be?
Sodium does.
Sodium. This is the behavior of sodium, right? We get this very quick depolarization that if you look on the action potential, very little time has passed, right? It's essentially a vertical line. Okay, so we get this very quick change. Okay. And from there it becomes a little bit easy, right? If you have that as your starting point. So the correct answer here is what? Which one? If number 1 is sodium,
Yep.
it's either C or F, right? From there, it just gets worse, right? So it's calcium then potassium. You notice potassium doing something weird there? Anybody thought that was kind of strange? Yeah, yeah. So actually what's happening here is this is total permeability, right? So the leak channels in these types of cells are a little bit different. And actually when you have that depolarization, the permeability of the leak channels goes down a little bit. Not entirely, but it goes down, right? So there's some changes here because there are multiple types of potassium channels we're dealing with. Again, which is why I'm not gonna put this on your exam exactly, but you should understand the principle how we're going through these permeability changes. Okay. All right, so 3 types of channels here. What type of cell is this? Intractable cell, right? Okay. We'll start, I knew we would have a lot of time, but let's start a little bit of EKG here. Where's the K? There isn't one. So ECG. That's how you spell cardio, right? Most people say EKG in clinical practice, so I guess we may as well too, even though they're wrong. They're never wrong. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of a background here. Just, and you don't really need to write much down here, but just sort of conceptualize this. What you have on the left is just a block of muscle tissue. Okay, it's heart muscle, but it doesn't matter. And it's something like 4 cells wide by 4 cells tall by something. And we've got a way of measuring the electrical charge here. We've got a little voltmeter that has a positive and negative pole. Okay? All of these cells are at rest, right? And all of these cells being at rest have a negative membrane potential of let's say -90. Okay? And while there's nothing happening in terms of membrane depolarization, that reads as a 0 on EKG here. Okay? What happens is that when we have, there's nothing, okay. when we have a depolarization, in EKG what we're doing is we're measuring the movement of that wave front. Okay, so think of this as you're in a bathtub and you're pushing some water along, right? You're making a wave. That's what it's measuring. Okay, it's not measuring how much water there is in the tub. It's measuring where it's moving. Okay, so if we have a depolarization, that is, our cells are turning positive on the inside, right? Due to the influx of sodium, right? That wave front is moving across the cells and from cell to cell across this massive heart tissue. Okay. How we read that is that the voltmeter sees this wave coming toward it. Okay? And if we have a depolarization moving to our positive electrode, what happens is we see a positive deflection on the EKG machine. Okay. So electrocardiography, we're not measuring the absolute state of membrane potentials. Okay. We're measuring movement towards the electrode or away from the electrode. That makes sense? Okay. And so what's going to happen to these cells? All of them are going to depolarize. They're fully depolarized. What state would they be in interaction potential at this point? Where are they positive? And stay positive for a little while. Plateau, perfect. Right? So in the plateau, we're up in the positive territory. Right? And once all of these cells have their depolarization in the sodium channels, they're all now in plateau. Okay? Slowly drifting towards negative, but they're in the positive territory for quite a while. Okay? So that for a period of time we get nothing, right? And so what happens in the voltmeter is that it's going to come down to zero or back to zero. Okay? So even though we're completely the opposite of where we were when everything was negative, both a fully positive or a fully negative membrane will read the same, right? Because we're not measuring membrane potentials here. What are we measuring? We're measuring the movement of voltage change, right? So a depolarization sweeping through our muscle mass, right, will read. But if it's in the resting state or if it's in the plateau state, there's nothing to show. Okay, everything is stable. Okay, so we'll pick up there and we'll talk about how this applies to the heart next time, and we'll finish up that section